Cool. All right. And we'll go live. Ladies and gentlemen, hello again, and welcome back to Don't Worry About the Government. My name is Chris Novembrino. This is episode 501. And on the previous episode, or maybe one of the ones prior, but certainly an episode that came before in the past, I probably said something to the effect of I was looking forward to the Trump administration no longer being a thing because there are indeed real problems facing America that are beyond the problems that Trump has either created or exacerbated and put on overdrive. And I wanted to do entire episodes that took a fairly in-depth look at those sorts of things. And Doug here, who is joining me on the show. Hi, Doug.
Hello.
Do you have anything else I should include in your introduction?
Um, I guess for the purposes of this episode, I'll just say that I am someone who has a lot of experience with student loans. I'm very well versed in the different repayment plans, the different forgiveness plans, and just a lot of the policy surrounding it. And and I'll just say this, I'm someone who's gone through, a bachelor's degree. I've gone through a master's degree. I've gone through a PhD, and accumulated a significant amount of debt with that. But I've done it strategically, which I think is the problem. One of the issues is a lot of people don't know how to do that. In addition to that, I'm a high school teacher, so I teach, juniors and seniors who are getting ready to go to college, and I see their plans and their preparations for going into post-secondary lives and how they plan to pay for it, and some issues with that as well. So I have a lot of thoughts, and I think as we see a lot of the things that not just Joe Biden has proposed doing or has already done in the last day or two to address student loans, but just what we're seeing out of the Democratic Party in general on the further left that want more, I guess you would say, more complete, more extreme solutions to the student loan debt crisis. And I think it's a very nuanced topic that I don't think we're seeing a lot of nuance from in Washington.
Yeah, I would even say on this topic that you just don't get a lot of good in-depth coverage on it in media generally. Nuanced, a word that I'm not necessarily always crazy about, or sometimes they can be a cop-out word, but is totally applicable here when we are talking about this topic. And yeah, to kind of finish up my little introduction here, yeah, Doug proposed, hey, let's do an episode on student loans. And so I thought that was a fantastic idea. And so what I'm going to do here in terms of depth, there is quite a lot of it, I'm going to be throwing up the screen or my show slate here. Let me I just need to hit this. I'm still learning all of the Zoom versus Google. I don't know about you, but I have to switch back and forth between the various the various things. But I think we are now in a full share screen mode, right?
Yes, I could see it perfectly.
Okay, cool. Cool. Hopefully everyone else can. So this is episode 501, student loans. And this is going to be an interesting topic, a discussion about like Bernie, Warren, and Sanders kind of getting into play here, and just a size and scope problem because I think it's underappreciated. A lot of times you hear about student loans, and I think the worst thing that's happened in the student loans debate is that it gets conflated with the term free college because this is a much, much more complicated issue than free college. If you look at this chart here, and I will explain this for people who are just listening to the show, if we're looking at the U.S. debt balance, which a phrase I like to use for this is trapped capital. These are payments that get made to service debt every month and thus don't go to local businesses and other places in your local economy. This is if the critique of the universal basic income. If you give someone $1,000, the $1,000 is going to get sucked up by these trapital capping or trapital or capital trapping. I can speak. I know words.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm fine. I have the best words.
Trapital's not a bad. Listen, you could coin that.
Trapital. It's Trapital, baby. So you have auto loans, you have credit card payments, student loans. Some of these are the debts that we incur. Some of these are the debts that get incurred by people because they're in acute crises, and these are the only ways that people can pay them out. I'm not making a value judgment in any of those. And in some cases, auto loans and credit cards, especially, the payment structures on these can be very predatory. In the case of student loans, we'll also see when we take a walk down memory lane here as to how do we get to this exacerbated crisis over the last 15 years. This is also something that is a beneficiary of predatory practices. But Doug, what made you want to talk about student loans top line other than we all have them and they are, I guess maybe that is good enough reason, but
Well, I mean, you take a look at that chart first of all that you have there. I mean, you take a look at 2005. When we and it really demonstrates over time how powerful the Department of Education is going to become, just because of the amount of debt it has control over. I'm thinking in 2015 we had under Bush, it was the education secretary was Secretary Spellings. And everyone said, "Oh, it's so adorable. Her last name is Spellings, and she's a teacher. It's cute." I mean, and the department itself, the Department of Education largely had dealt with student debt, but you know, it dealt with special education because that's a federal program. But most education programs are the state thing. States really have a lot of say so and a lot of control. And Bush obviously with No Child Left Behind kind of shifted a lot of that. But we see this growth in student loans, and oddly
and
enough,
it's crazy. It starts right around 2014. Like to kind of explain the chart just a little bit more for the listeners, real quickly. If you look at the slopes on auto loans and credit cards and even other, they are all moving at a steady. I'm not making a value judgment. This is a good slope, but a slope that is consistent with one another. And that's predictable over time. In the case of the student loans thing, the slope goes up a dramatic amount starting in 2014.
yeah. And I think there's a couple issues at play here. Obviously, the first one is in 2005. I think it's 2005. Uh, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Student loans are no longer dischargeable in bankruptcy and are very, very difficult to get discharged. So there's no escape valve in that regard. Whereas with credit cards, auto loans, you get underwater, file Chapter 7, file Chapter 13, you can get out of that. So that is not an option here. The other thing, and I think it's on the other end, is the cost issues. So I think there's a lot of parallels between the healthcare debate and the college cost debate, in the sense that these are two sectors where costs are getting way out of control. College tuition for the better part of 20 years has been exploding. Healthcare costs for the better part of 20 years has been exploding. But I will say I think there's other issues at play with the college costs that I think are a little bit more easy to approach than healthcare. And specifically, I'm just talk to this so I don't get too off on a tangent here.
Oh
But
yeah, yeah. This is going to be a long one, people. So just
yeah,
strap in the PDF I prepared here, which you can go and check out at patreon.com/DWATG or at DWATG on Twitter. I posted it as well. It's like 12 pages. And there's I didn't count how many links are in this thing, but like let's just say it's a copiously cited PDF, and there's a lot of nuances that we need to get into in this topic. Sorry,
yeah.
Doug. Continue on.
So, and just because I want to touch on cost real quick before we start talking about the actual debt. I think that a lot of this stems from our, similar to how we have a car culture. Everyone has to have a car. You want to buy a car, that's an American dream, have a car. I think that we also have like this college culture.
Everybody needs to go to college.
Everyone needs to go to college, and not just go to college.
4-year university.
For university, you got to go to the best college you can go to. If you get into it, you find a way to pay. If you get into Harvard, you will regret every day of your life if you don't go to Harvard. So you got to figure out a way to pay for that, and you have to. Just this culture of, you don't have that with the car culture. It's not like you got to buy the Ferrari, otherwise you're going to regret it.
If you
It's like,
don't buy the Mustang, you're gonna live in hell.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think that this is a big cultural issue. This idea that, what, uh, I think there's people that kind of look down on the idea of community college. There's a lot of people that look down on the idea of going to the in-state public 4-year institution.
Being a skilled tradesman, having quality knowledge about plumbing, electricity, these are skills that will never go away.
No.
Yeah, yeah, and like, but to your point, culturally, I think that there is a bit of a snobbishness towards being a skilled tradesman.
Yes, and we'll talk about like this culture of college and this idea that building capital in yourself by going to these expensive schools is a very predatory idea, and we'll talk more about it, I'm sure, in a little bit, where the different minority groups that this affects disproportionately and the problems with that. But regardless, all these problems with costs have led to this ridiculous student loan debt crisis that we have right now. But here's the issue is I think a lot of people need to understand when we say student loan debt, what does that mean? Because there are more than one type of student loan. There's federal loans and there's private loans. The vast majority of this debt is federal loans, like 92% is federal student loans, which are given out by the Department of Education. You fill out your FAFSA application, and then they say, okay, this is what you're approved for, and you go ahead and you get your loans through the federal government. And right now, I think as last time I checked, the average borrower right now has about $36,000 in federal student loan debt. And I know that a lot of people are looking at a lot of these proposals put in place right now by Biden, put in place by Warren, put in place by Bernie, and they're a little bit all over the place in terms of what they want to get done. And right now, the big one is canceling student loan debt. It should just cancel it, which is something that I believe the executive branch has the ability to do with the federal loans. They have that ability to cancel them.
That's interesting. Hold that thought, because I want to revisit that, because I don't know that I've seen anything written on that in the context of the Supreme Court. And that's going to be an interesting wicket in all of this later on here.
Yeah. But in here, and we'll say, and just kind of touching on what has been done, because I'm just going to put this out here right now. I don't know if, just from a political standpoint, the political capital put in place that it would require to cancel student loan debt is necessarily worth it. And is it even going to make that big of a difference? Because right now, there are a number of federal student loan programs and repayment programs that are put in place to make repayment, how do I say, more, I want to say more comfortable, but equitable and appropriate and able, so it's not so crushing on the American people. The federal student loan program, and this is maybe a controversial opinion, I believe for the most part is fine. I will say it's hashtag good, actually. All right. And
make your case on this.
Okay. I'm going to make my case on this. Now, this is keeping all the cost parts separated, but I'm just saying as a program itself. Right now, as it stands, there are when you take out federal student loans, you are paying back on a 10-year standard repayment plan. That's generally the default. It's like, okay, you got 10 years to repay this. We're going to, here's your actuarial table. You're going to go and pay this back in 10 years. Now, the federal government, the Department of Education, they've put in a number of income-driven repayment plans. All right. The first one being, just like, income-based repayment. They also have pay as you earn, where it locks in your payments at a certain percentage of your income. So it's like right now, I think it's like 10%. So that's what you'd pay back. So if you owe like if let's say you're making 40K a year, your monthly payments are going to be probably right around 150, 200 dollars a month, which is about the average student loan payment. Now, there are other programs in place right now that are under attack, and one of them being the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Are you familiar with this?
I am not.
Okay.
Inform me and the listeners.
This was, oddly enough, a program that was very it was pushed a lot by Bernie Sanders, and it was passed in 2009, 2010. And what this program does is it says, if you work for a public sector job, or if you work for a nonprofit organization, so if you're a teacher, if you're a firefighter, if you're a policeman, if you work for the post office, if you work for any type of 504c3, whatever the nonprofit
for
is.
America, that sort of thing.
Yes, exactly. If you work for any type of organization like that, and you make your payments, and they could be these income-based repayments for 10 years, so 120 payments, whatever student loans you got left, forgiven, completely free and clear, tax-free. You've paid them off. That is a program that was put in place that has been under attack by the Trump administration. Our good friend Betsy DeVos tried to get rid of it.
It was really stunning in preparation for this episode to discover that Betsy Voss didn't give a fuck about any of us.
No, she did not.
That was not expecting that.
Yeah, but regardless, this program itself was put in place to try and be a solution to the bankruptcy crisis, the issue that these loans cannot be discharged in bankruptcy, and in a lot of cases they can do a lot of public good. Now, the problem is, let's say you don't work in a public sector job. Let's say you work in the private sector. Let's say you work at McDonald's or Starbucks or something like that, but you have all these student loans. The income-based repayment plans, they still have those they still have those forgiveness things built in, but it's not 10 years, it's like 20. And then the problem is, after those 20 years, all the money that is forgiven is now counted as taxable income. So if you had like $100,000 forgiven, you just made $100,000 in income that you need to pay in
realized income that you have to pay at the highest Marshall tax rates. Yep. There's been two big problems when we're looking at the loan. And I gotta tell you, I don't know how to say this in like a nice way. I think one of the big issues with the student loans crisis is these are fundamentally bad loans. They are. And when I say bad loans, what do I mean? They are loans not unlike the ninja loans for mortgages back in the aughts, that have been given out in a large way to people who do not have a plausible plan of repaying those loans. And the premise of a lot of these loans is, okay, I'm going to give this person X amount of money. They're going to go to school, hopefully get good grades, hopefully get out of college and enter into a job market that I, the lender, have absolutely no control over. You could say yes, but also no. And hope that person lands at the right job, and then hope that they make enough money to pay it off. So like the loans are fundamentally bad. They're on kind of shaky principles. I think that also ties in with our college culture idea, that it's like, if you don't know what you're a senior in high school, you don't know what you want to do. And they say, well, you go to college, you'll figure it out. Well, you're not. Why are you going to the $20,000 a year college when you can, spend $2,000 at the community college and just figure it out that way? And I think that plays into it. Yeah, no, I think part of this is also cost creep. Some of these arguments that I will make, I will straight up say that if you, one, did cost control on what four-year university was, or two, as you're suggesting, had more people doing the first 2 years of their undergraduate degree at a community college and then finishing the second 2 years at a state level university. And then if they want to do continuing education, if you just did the 2-and-2 model, that would reduce college costs in a substantive way. Also, if you changed college culture and so that people didn't immediately have to be on this track this time track of you're 18 years old, you've got to get into college right now, and if you don't get into college at 18, how are you ever going to do it? Well, who the hell has money at 18? Nobody. So if you want to stay on the track, if you want to stay in the college culture, to your point, you're having to enter into a loan. So all of these things get into, I think we're in agreement here, all these things get into the idea that these are like bad loans. And then the other part that's always been predatory, or that's bothered me so much about these loans, is that if you are a lower income earner, it is inherently going to take you longer to pay off the loans. So these loans are inherently regressive. And the people who get whumped the most with the interest are the people who make the least amount of money. That's
Yeah,
always been
absolutely.
asked backwards.
Yeah, and then and then when you take a look at this idea of forgiving these, as Biden proposed, he wants to knock off 10 grand. So whatever the loan balances are, he wants to knock off 10 grand. That in of itself is going to be very regressive, because the people who are struggling right now are probably on some type of income-based repayment plan where they're not paying what they need to pay this off in 10 years. And in fact, they're probably paying just enough to cover interest, and we're probably still accruing interest. So knocking off 10 grand isn't going to help them day to day, because realistically, a lot of them are probably still going to end up being on those income repayment plans. They're still going to be making the same kind of payments that they've been making, and it may not even make that big of a difference. They may, in 5 years, with the interest reaccrued, they may be back up to their same balance they were on, before the 10 grand was wiped away. So so then you take a look at people like Warren or AOC, who are advocating,
50 grand as the sweet
yes,
spot. And I want to make the quick case for the sweet spot kind of idea, which is that I think that people like Warren and AOC and others are kind of right that the omnibus all the way up thing actually ends up again favoring the rich. This whole system's very perverse. But if you actually do kind of a full out debt cancellation without a wealth tax, I'll put an asterisk there. If you do a wealth tax, you can kind of balance that out. But as it stands, if you just did a blanket all the way to the top debt cancellation, you also end up in a paradigm where the people who went to the most expensive schools, which are going to be the Ivy League schools, and thus people who are like top 20%, and also PhDs and that sort of thing too. No knock on you, Doug.
I'm taking.
Yeah, those people are getting an advantage when who we do need to be taking care of is actually like a notch down from there.
Yeah, and I'll even say this: if they do go up to 50, the federal borrowing limits are only like 56K for undergrad. So that would knock out all federal loans for undergrad, which is probably a fair thing to do. And I do think, I will say this though, and I don't know exactly what direction this goes with this, and why it is set up this way, but every year they have limits on what you can take for your first year of college. This is how much you could take out in federal student loans. This is how much you could take out the second year. This is what you take out the third year. This is what you take out the fourth year. Beyond that, parents need to take out loans if they're really low income, or they need to rely on private loans, which are, I would argue, the most predatory loan there is, and probably
Yes.
shouldn't even exist.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
But once you get to graduate school, you could take out as much federal debt you want. You go to law school, it's unlimited. You go to it's in I do not understand why that is the
I
case.
found that crazy when I was putting together like the stuff on this episode, which is those type of loans are really open ended, and like that's also what I was kind of getting to when I was saying kind of bad principles when it comes into getting like that kind of loan. Like I just that's so hard to justify because presumably someone in law school at that point does not need unbridled financial loans.
Can I share a personal story?
Sure,
As someone who,
it's a personal show.
absolutely, as someone who borrowed loans for federal, for my grad degree and for my PhD, my master's and my PhD, I received scholarships for both programs. In fact, the PhD was almost entirely covered, but I could still borrow additionally on top up to the cost of attendance. So if I wanted to borrow money for books, or if I wanted to buy a laptop, there was other things in place that I could borrow money on, and there was nothing stopping me from borrowing thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars every year, knowing that it's going to get forgiven under public service loan forgiveness anyway. So and that's what I mean. It's like you're seeing.
That's kind of wild. Like you could take that money, get on Robinhood, and just like invest it and be making money off of a federal loan,
Yeah, and that's
knowing that it would be forgiven on the back end.
because it's yes, and because these costs of attendance, and that's what the other issue is because a lot
Yeah.
of times schools, it's like they can say not only are they increasing their tuition, but they could say, oh, well, you're probably going to need like $4,000 for books every semester. You're going to need this, so they have these exorbitant cost breakdowns where they can justify loans up to a ridiculous amount, and I just think it's just the whole system itself. There's some very good things in place, and I do think the federal student loan system is keeping whether or not the idea of loans for education is ethical or not. Let's keep that. I don't know if we have time to get into that.
Yeah,
So
no, like yeah, it's a much more interesting philosophical discussion here. Like, is there essentially ever a good principled loan on this? But like, no, they're like to me, as you're just illustrating here, really obvious places for cost containment that don't reduce the service but get rid of like stupid loopholes. Like,
yes,
it's a silly loophole to have it here.
and I will say this, and I think that that's one of the easiest things they could do is somehow cap the federal loan program for graduates, or even I'll even say maybe cap what is forgiven under public service loan forgiveness. Because I'll say this right now, there is nothing preventing me from just going to law school on a whim, because and just keep teaching and just getting that all forgiven too. And there really should be.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like yeah, so long as I can pass the entry exam, I can get these weird, like, essentially like brain loans from the government just for being smart enough to pass an entry exam into a law school.
Yeah, and then while at the same time, there's other people who aren't working in public sector jobs, who are a lot of times they have no solution. I mean, I talk to people online a lot with people who have issues with student loans, and we should not be in a situation where I'm seeing people like, all right, if I fake my death, what happens to the loans? Can I disappear to South America and just pretend these? I mean, there needs to be that should never be a solution. And that's what we're experiencing right now, is because people see this idea of, okay, well, I can keep my loans on income-based repayment, but in 20 years, I'm going to have this giant tax debt that's going to be due right away that I have no idea how to deal with. And I feel like there needs to be some type of long-term solution. And
Yes.
that would be like the easiest one for me, is just eliminate that tax bomb at the end of this income-based repayment and just forgive them their debt. And so at least, even if it's not necessarily the best financial decision for them is to stay on this income-based repayment for 20 years, at least they see light at the end of the tunnel. It's like, all right, I could just deal with this, make these minimum payments for 20 years, and then I'm scot-free and I can move on with my life. Because right now people are just ruining their lives, and they're doing it at the age of 18 because they don't know any better.
All right, so to just throw up a few more figures here to put this into context of like how big this trapping of capital problem is, and then also kind of segue us into the intersection between class and race here, because as we talked about, there is a class issue here with the way these loans are currently structured, and there's also a race issue here. Student debt stands at $1.55 trillion annually. It's the biggest category of debt that Americans owe, aside from mortgages. Homeowners, of course, generally kind of at least a little bit better off than non-homeowners. On average, student loan borrowers owe between, Doug was right on the money here, according to the U.S. Department of Education, between $200 and $299 every month. It's like you read this slate before the show. An amount that is, for many, simply untenable. I mean, putting $200 to $299 up every month, that's more than double what I have to pay Spectrum every month, for the internet and all of that jazz. That's a big bill. And conversely, if you had that extra $299 a month to do anything else with, that could be a car payment if you didn't have a car. $299 more will cover you for a reasonable car. Pew study from November found that nearly 6 in 10 borrowers said that it would be somewhat or very difficult to restart loan payments on their loans in the next month. One of the things that got passed through CARES that I don't think is appreciated is this whole thing of debt relief. This big debt relief package has actually been helping out a lot of Americans. And there's been a lot of trepidation and concern that not getting the next stimulus package passed will leave people kind of floating.
I think
Oh, go ahead.
I wanted to touch on that real quick. And I think the one, because this started under Trump, this idea we have the student loan pause right now, and Biden has just extended it through September.
Yes.
This is, I don't think this gets enough credit for what it is, because this is a really an incredible way to relieve some debt for these people, because every month, if you have, that's like a stimulus check every month by not having to pay these loans.
I
It's
know.
0% interest. And get this, I don't think a lot of people understand this. The people who are on public service loan forgiveness, like me or any other teacher or any other public worker who are paying their 10 years, every month of this, it still counts as a payment towards those 10 years, even though they're not making payments.
So that's a double dip.
Yes.
Whoa. So that's essentially like a $600 check, more or less, kind of going to at least some people every month here.
Yeah.
No, there's an entire. I talked about this, I think, at the last episode. Like, the thing that the Democrats do the best that they like necessarily can't take credit for is sneaky good plans like this. Like, this is actually a very big deal.
And I think that this is what I'm talking about. This didn't cost them any political capital to get this done, and
None.
it's a huge thing. But if they're going to go ahead and just forgive 10 grand, even forget the 50 grand, if they're going to forgive 10 grand, that is going to cause such a stink, because people are throwing a fit about loan cancellation, and I didn't pay for this. I paid for my loans. Why can't they? And it's not going to do nearly as much good as something like this is doing right now, because people, even if they're not making their payments right now, the interest is not accruing. It's staying where it's at. They could start saving up their money. They could start paying down credit cards, which I'm sure are way worse than their student loan interest rates. They could start paying down their car payments. They could start saving up some money or do some other stuff that they need to do, or the most obvious one, buy food during COVID.
Yeah. No. This is super illustrative, though, of the trapped capital problem that I've been talking about for years. This is money that has been there, that is just tied up. And if you release it, it actually can be life-changing shit. To throw the screen back up here. So more than 1 million people defaulted on their student loans or every year. By 2023, the proportion of borrowers falling behind with repayments is expected to reach 40%. And that's the other issue here, where we have really arrived at what I think can more aptly be dubbed a student loan crisis. There's opportunity to fix things in this crisis and really address some of these long-standing issues, but it needs to be addressed.
Yeah. And I think, and as I said before, I think one of the easiest things they could do is allow these income-based repayment plans to just be a somewhat permanent solution, that it's okay to stay on this the entire time and just paying these minimum payments, which 10% of your income. And in fact, Biden recommended possibly even lowering that down to 5%. So
I think that'd be great.
Yeah.
That would also be a very big deal.
Yeah. And then that could be because here's the thing, they could ultimately, we can get, that's in a sense a way of putting a ceiling on how much damage these student loans could do to this Trapital, as you would call it.
Yeah. I appreciate you rolling with my verbal flub. I am embracing it too. No, then that by proxy is a way of putting money in people's pockets. There's a lot of talk right now about $1,400 versus $2,000, and one thing that I really want to illustrate for people, not as a way of defending him on waffling for the $2,000, is that there are bigger fish in the ocean here, and a lot of them are getting fried, and they're getting fried very quietly. So just realize that is happening. And And like another part of the student loans thing, you're putting this into perspective, is just how much this is hitting our African American friends and neighbors. The average white student owes about $1,000 20 years after starting college, whereas the average African American student after finishing college, or at 20 years after starting college, still owes 18 grand, which is illustrative of 20 years of making less money, and thus having to pay loans for longer amounts of time, in some cases, the full 20 years or more. And so this has been regressive, and it's also been hitting brown and black people more than it has been hitting, in particular, though, black and African students, as one chart shows here. White students, it's 60%, Hispanic or Latino students, 65%, black or African American students, 87% affected by that.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of intersections here when we're talking about uh, going to college as a way to, build up uh, that personal capital, and the idea that uh,
And the college culture. I mean, did you see that recent
yeah,
viral video of the guy who got into law school, and his mom is ecstatic and she's like screaming up prayers and crying, yet like it made the rounds. Beautiful, touching. I am so excited for that family, but also totally a contributor to that college culture problem that you're talking about. Because how is that kid going to be paying for those 4 years in law school?
that's absolutely the issue here. And this goes back, I mean, how think about all the back in the 90s when we were both kids and we were like, oh, they have like all these fraternity movies and these, like you got the American Pies and stuff like that, where they just, or even going back to Animal House, or
Yeah.
where they paint this as like, oh, this is just like everyone has to experience, living on campus. Everyone needs to experience going through all these different things, when it's just this is like an infomercial for debt, and you're not getting anything out of this. And let's be real, it's 2021, and the things that you would get out of an Ivy League school, do you, is it really the same? Is it that much different than you're going to get anywhere else in the information age?
And are you getting education or are you getting status? I've really been thinking about, like, you brought up the Ivy Leagues earlier, and like, would you take out a loan to go to the Ivy Leagues? And I'm almost going yes, but the answer as to why it's yes is not because it will make you a high caliber lawyer or whatever. It's because if you work at the Harvard Crimson, the newspaper there, you will find it very easy to land on your feet in the field of journalism or doing something in politics. Look at how many people, and it's all the way from Brianna Joy Gray all the way to, I think Tony Blinken was also at the Harvard Crimson. So you pay to go to the Ivy League places for status. It has nothing to do with education.
Yeah, it's networking.
It's networking. Yeah, it's class.
It's getting you into the party. That's all it is.
Mhm.
And you're not getting any better of an education there. And I think there are easier ways to get into the party, less expensive ways, not easier, but less expensive ways to get into the party than, taking out, hundreds of $1,000s in student loan debt so you can spend 4 years at Harvard or Brown or wherever, Yale, wherever Ivy League school. And I think that this is going to come to a head at some point, because the vast majority of people, when they go out and they go to a job interview, they don't really care where they went to college. And they care maybe they got a degree. They care that they got an education. They look at their work experience more so than anything, probably.
What have you been doing the last 5 years? It's like, yeah. That's the question. Last 5-10 years, what have you been doing? It's never about, tell me about your time at UNT.
Yeah, no, and that's what I mean. It's like this, and I do think that this idea that these different universities and high, Ivy League schools build up intrinsic capital within yourself, I do think that hits minority communities more than it hits white communities, because they see this as a way to build up capital and build up whiteness, which, are obviously connected, as a way to pull themselves up in society and overcome the oppression that comes with being a person of color in America.
Yeah. No, like, and I heard I was listening to Jim Jeffries earlier, and he had a funny joke, which was a good joke, which is that this whole idea of like if you really apply yourself and you put your mind to it and you strive, you can make it. It's not unique to America. Like this narrative is from all over the world, and we're a nation of immigrants. And so when you come here as an immigrant and you're starting from the bottom, you want to work your way up. You're hearing that narrative twice essentially. And this whole invest in yourself thing. I mean, it's also there are bad investment narratives that I think get taught as axiomatic, like go to college and invest in yourself. Which in 1970, when college cost X amount of dollars, even when you adjusted it for inflation, that actually was a good investment narrative. Now, if you have to go hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to make $60,000 a year, is it
It's
yeah.
it's people who try to apply Dave Ramsey principles to education. Who, and I don't know how you feel about Dave Ramsey, but
You know what's funny? He actually ended up on the slate here real briefly as a citation. I just like because I saw one of his links, but I don't love him or anything like that. But he was less bad on this than I thought he was going to be.
Here's the issue with Dave Ramsey. He is someone who is he's very much in the vein of, hey, do community college, pay for the in-state school, maybe even like take a year off and save up money and try to cash flow your education. Just do the cheapest school you can. He's very big on that. But at the same time, he's also he's not someone that I would necessarily buy into completely on when it comes to student loans, because he's somebody who's going to look at public service loan forgiveness and he's going to hand wave that, because he's someone who is very much on the right wing of the political spectrum, and he'll say that, oh no, you shouldn't do that. Don't rely on the government. You should just work, pick up a second job, and just keep throwing everything you have at the student loan debt. And I just feel like he's very dogmatic about a lot of things, especially debt. And I think with student loans, you need to understand that there are times where you can take out loans, you can take out debt, and you can take advantage of these federal programs, because a lot of them are doing a lot of good. And my favorite stat, which shows how absolutely messed up we are as far as preparing our students for repayment, is public service loan forgiveness. When it started in 2009, 2008, they had the 10-year repayment. When people finally started submitting their paperwork a couple of years ago, when they finally hit the 10 years, their number was like 80 or 90% of them got rejected because they were on the wrong repayment plan the entire time. Now, they eventually tried to redo this, where they kind of fixed it, where they said, okay, we'll allow these people to come in and go ahead and we'll count these loans. But it's like the fact that they spent 10 years and they didn't realize they were on the wrong repayment plan the entire time is really demonstrative of how we are not preparing any of these borrowers to tackle this debt. And these ones who went into this thinking they're going to get forgiveness under this program, and they didn't even know something as simple as that, is mind-boggling to me.
There's a lot of tragedies here of just people not knowing that resources are available, or just like a basic mismanagement. Like that's the stuff that really does get me pissed off, where you start to like really look at the numbers here and you go, man, the money's been here for a lot of this stuff. And it's been going the wrong way for 15, 20 years in some cases, and being mismanaged for 15, 20 years in some cases.
It's insane. Or even some state plans. Like there are states that I'll have like forgiveness programs. Hey, if you work in the state for like 10 years, just file this application. We'll knock off like, 10 grand. We'll knock off 20 grand. There's a federal program that took off like $17,000 off my student loans because I was a special education teacher that a lot of people don't even know exists. You just file the application, they take it off. Like there's so many of these things out there and just nobody knows about them.
All right, so to talk a little bit more about Biden's plan here before we talk about how this is essentially a mess that Biden and his Delaware roots. For those people who are not familiar with Delaware, Delaware has a lot of banks in it. It is a place where shell corporations are made. Like it has been known as Shellaware in the past, and senators from Delaware. Joe Biden was a senator from Delaware. Senators from Delaware have always been serving the banks, and Biden, yes, we're
Is
all we're thrilled that he's the president and Donald Trump isn't, to be completely clear here. Doug and I are very pleased. But Biden, this is a very unique to Delaware problem, and his decades long roots to Delaware come up here time and again. But his plan is going to cancel $10,000 of federal loan debt for every borrower. It would cost about $370 billion, according to the CBO. It would eliminate the debt for 15 million borrowers that owe 10 grand or less. So real people, the real people being helped by this plan, even at the Biden level, are 15 million. A broader based approach would help 42 million borrowers. So something that Elizabeth Warren is championing, like $50,000, would get you much closer to the 42 million Americans that are affected by this. And they're arguing that, as we've been discussing here, that you could take out a mortgage if you want to, which right now, given the way the housing market works, whole different discussion. Okay investment, or invest for retirement, which, given the way the Wall Street works, a whole different discussion as well. Also a valid way of accruing and amassing wealth to prepare for retirement in this economy here. So yeah, like that is the situation. Oh, I guess one last thing I'll add here. The debt, like we were discussing the slope earlier, it's been growing at 6 times the rate of the U.S. economy. So that's how we got here. Any other
Yeah.
thoughts before we get into Biden and why he or how he caused this mess?
Well, I think we're going to get into that because I think one of the big issues is the reason it's growing is because there's no way to get out from under it.
Yeah, so a lot of sins in this century go back to the 2005 Bankruptcy Abuse Prevention and Consumer Protection Act. That really, you could get into a whole episode of problems that have spiderwebbed off of that one bill. And you'll see here just a little sample of this. This is from, oh golly, I'll have to even look at where this. I think this might be from. Oh no, this is from the Guardian. So until 2005, private student loans were eligible for bankruptcy protections, just like other forms of private credit. But in that year, Congress passed the Bankruptcy Abuse Prevention and Consumer Protection Act, a law that makes it vastly more difficult for struggling former students to rebuild their lives by discharging the debt and starting over. In 2020, Biden tried to justify his backing of the Bankruptcy Act, and his campaign spokesman, like, you can listen to the nomenclature here, the phrasing that he does. He knows that he can't fully run away from it. So his spokesman says, quote, knowing that the bill was likely to make it through the Republican-led Congress, he wanted to moderate the bankruptcy bill and protect middle-class families, which is ironic when you consider the actual impacts of this. He believed that if you have income and consumer debts that you can pay, you should agree to a repayment plan that you can afford. In the lead up to the 2005 Bankruptcy Act, Biden tried to justify his support for the legislation by pointing to the abuse of the bankruptcy system by people who should at least pay back some of their debts. By requiring better off borrowers to repay what they could afford, private lenders would be able to reduce their interest rates to the benefit of all consumers, was the argument. Unfortunately, that was not borne out by events, as we discussed here. And in terms of the abuse of the bankruptcy system, just take my word for it. There are links in the slate here, though. Later reviews found that the level of abuse in the student loan system was relatively insignificant, with the exception of what we discussed here. Nor did the removal of the bankruptcy protections result in private student loan interest rates getting lowered. When an earlier version of the bill was in front of Congress, a respected law professor at Harvard Law School was pretty upset about the terms. And in 2002, she wrote an entire paper that decried Biden's forceful support of it. She actually went on to deliver testimony to Congress and did not make a friend of the Biden wing of the Democratic Party, which is now in control of the party. By doing so, the author of that paper was Elizabeth Warren, and she said that the changes would be so detrimental to many groups, but among others, women. And she said that Senator Biden supports the legislation that will fall hardest on women. Why? That answer will have to come from him. He is a zealot advocate on behalf of one of his biggest contributors, the financial services industry. Warren's suspicion that the Biden enthusiasm for the toughening bankruptcy laws came from his close ties to the credit card companies that persist to this day. Professor Jacoby said, I don't know how to explain this other than to explain his stance on the bankruptcy policy for financially distressed families other than his relationship with the consumer credit industry. There isn't another plausible explanation. How close is this relationship, you might ask? As a U.S. Senator from Delaware, a state that hosts many of the largest financial corporations in the country, that relationship came naturally. So naturally, at one point, someone referred to him as the senator from MBNA, which was a major credit card company, which has since been taken over by Bank of America during mergers. He said back in 1999, I am not the senator from MBNA. Like, that's how close his relationship is. In his demurrings, you could tell the truth here, which is that Joe Biden had a decades-long relationship with one of the largest industries in his state as the senator from his state. What industry was it? It was the private banking sector. And campaign finance watchdogs underline this point. In the 2003 to 2008 senatorial election cycle, Biden received more than $500,000 in help from credit card companies, financial services, and banks, the Open Secrets database shows. That's a bit of wordy reading there. I wanted to get that all in because I think there's a lot of interesting context here as to how we got there. Biden was the Democratic steward for this Republican-led bankruptcy bill, and he was the Democratic architect in this. Getting back to that George Carlin line I like to cite of, whenever you hear bipartisan on a bill, it means that a larger than usual deception is occurring.
Yeah, and I think this is what the big issue here, and this is probably where I'm going to completely bury private student loan debt in its sheer existence, because what we have here is a situation where banks are now not just issuing student loans that are privately, because as we said before, they can, especially for undergrad, and this is a lot of this comes, almost all of it comes from this, they can only borrow up to a certain amount of federal student loans for each year. So their first year of college, the limits might only be like $6,000 or $7,000. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head, but it's probably the roundabout number. But you know, if you're going to a school that's like $25,000 a year, where's the rest of that money coming from? Oh, it's coming from a private student loan. And the beautiful thing about this, and why I'm sure these banks love them, is because thanks to Mr. Biden here with his bankruptcy law in 2005, private student loans cannot be discharged in bankruptcy. And it is very, very, very hard for it to happen. I mean, it's insane how hard it is to happen. And then the worst part is they have none of the protections that the federal loans have. There's no income-based repayment that is required. There's no forgiveness programs that are required.
Did this also impact medical debt too?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. No, as I said, there are so many sins that go back to this bankruptcy bill, and it's a reason. Like, I am not a Biden guy, and this bankruptcy bill is a big reason why.
And here's the other thing, and it goes beyond this because we still see it today. You still see the ads for SoFi and all these other debt consolidation companies. Consolidate your student loan debt so you can get it out of the. So you can get out, because the interest rates for federal student loans are around 6 or 7%. It's like, hey, you can consolidate with us and get it down to like 3, and then make it a private student loan, where a lot of this stuff comes from too. I think that is a trap. Even if some people think they can make their payments and they can deal with it, I think that the way that they're advertising these things is a trap. To the point where, because these banks know that they can just get these people to refi their federal loans, they ended up taking on, $70,000, $80,000 in debt that can't be discharged. And then if it does, and then even if they stop paying, they can start garnishing their wages. That's ultimately what it gets down to when they default. So this, I believe, I believe private student loans need to just go away. They are completely unethical. We were talking about the ethics of borrowing student loans at all. Private student loans, I believe, are completely unethical and need to disappear. They're so bad.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, I concur. Everything from the fundamentals of giving out the loan to how you get the money back from the loan, it just there's no there's no moral way to reconcile it.
And they use, and here's the horrible thing, is that a lot of times when you see people try to defend private loans, they argue like, well, if they got rid of private student loans, the federal student loan limits are only so low, so you're going to end up in a situation where lower income people aren't going to have access to higher education, and this is just not true. They're just not
Yeah.
going to. You're just preventing them from taking out this ridiculous debt that they're not going to be able to pay back.
No, and that's sort of a way of sidestepping the fundamental argument of this is a bad financial instrument. Like
Yes.
that's kind of what it's, don't you want the person in the inner city to go to school? Yes, that has nothing to do with the discussion, though. Like, yeah, is this a good instrument or a bad instrument? And I think that's a really interesting question here. Anything else in terms of the context in history and Biden's role in this? I think looking at this and seeing this article from The Guardian, it's very interesting to see the interplay between Warren and Biden on this and how Warren has actually been able to leverage Schumer and get Schumer to sign on to her bill. And that she's the one kind of putting pressure on Biden right now to do the bigger package. Like there's a lot of history here as we're watching that drama play out.
Yeah, and I think we even saw it a little bit play out in the Democratic primary debates where Biden eventually kind of said, you know what, maybe you had some good ideas with your bankruptcy plan. Maybe I should have gone with what you were saying back then in 2005. I don't remember which debate specifically, but
No,
I
I
do
know.
remember I do remember that interaction. And
That's another point too. In modest defense of Biden, I guess. He has moved to the left on some of these things. Some of what we're talking about here is old Biden, and he really sucked. Old Biden really sucked. He's less sucky now. And what you just said, Doug, like that moment in the debates is illustrative of some modest amount of growth. Not sufficient, but growth nonetheless.
And I will say this. I understand that this is a complicated issue when it comes to bankruptcy with student loans, because it's like, you take out all these student loans on a degree. It's not like you can repo the degree. I understand that, but I would also then argue this is why it can't be done through private sector. It cannot be private loans. I think that, and that's why I said, hashtag actually good. The federal student loan program, I think in essence, at its core, is not something that I think needs to be completely dismantled. I think that there are a lot of really good fundamental things that exist within it, and I think there's a lot of changes that can take place that aren't going to be that hard politically.
I would
That
want to
would do a lot.
reform the system because one, I see real obvious opportunities for reform, and two, I think those reforms could be really substantial. I would want to reform the system and see where the system's at before I'd be like, let's blow the whole thing to smithereens.
I think I think we could do some things, and I think someone needs to suggest this. I think putting some things in place that encourage affordable education options. So, perhaps increasing the federal student loan limits if you would get each year if you go to, an in-state public university as opposed to, the private Catholic school that costs twice as much, or increasing or even maybe doing something like, increasing the amount of time before you have to pay student loans back and before they start accruing interest. Maybe instead of 6 months, how it is now, or after 6 months after you're out of school, you have to start paying those loans back. Maybe push it back to like 2 or 3 years. Something like that, I think, could really benefit a lot of people.
Oh, that'd be a big difference. If it was 3 to 5 years, to that point, that's another way of giving people, if they want to, an opportunity to save up and get ahead on those payments. And it gives them a chance to kind of get their get landed. Same thing. Changing college culture. A point that we've mentioned a few times here. But not going to college right out of high school and having some money saved up so that you don't have to take a loan out, and removing the societal stigma of this idea that you're a failure of a human being if you get your undergraduate degree complete at the age of 26. You shouldn't be like, I'm a permanent child. I'm 26 and I just have an undergraduate degree. Like, we need to remove that societal stigma. There's nothing
Absolutely.
wrong with going to college at 22.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And once again, I think a lot of these things could happen under executive order, just because I believe that the Department of Education has a lot of leeway with what they can do with federal loans, and I
So
think that
this
this is something
this
they can do.
is I mentioned Dave Ramsey earlier, and this is the like there's not a lot of him on this slate by any stretch, but he brought up an interesting point in one of his little article things that I read real quickly, which is that legal scholars are divided on which part of the government, if any, can cancel federal student loans, and he's got a citation here. What I think that's illustrative of is that there is indeed a conservative argument here that will get argued and litigated through the courts about the issue will be finding who has standing, but you can imagine a state AG. I know, Doug, this might seem far fetched, but imagine, if you will, a state attorney general from a Republican state doing a ridiculous lawsuit as a performative gesture to advance legislative aims. Not that would ever happen.
Never,
Never. Yeah.
not in my country.
Not in this America.
Mm.
But so obviously, that happened just recently with Stop the Steal, right? You had 17 state AGs do this. You can imagine a world where, as Ramsey's sort of pointing at, and I appreciate that he's pointing at this obliquely too. That where, like, a Texas state AG, Ken Paxton, who's a nut, decides that he wants to advance the cause for conservatives against Biden on this federal loans forgiveness thing. And they argue it up to the Supreme Court, which is now 6-3, tilted staunchly in favor of the Federalist Society Republican conservatives. And that's Alito. That is Kavanaugh is definitely someone for that. Coney Barrett's probably someone for that. Roberts might not go along with that, but you got to worry about Gorsuch too.
Yeah, and you know what? And I say this as someone who doesn't have a law background, but I do wonder, when I think back of, like, I'm thinking back to, like, the Nixon administration. Do you remember the impoundment crisis? Are you familiar with this?
No.
This is essentially the gist is, I'm not going to get too in depth, but essentially Congress uh, passed laws and passed funding for certain things. He felt that he didn't want to spend the money on these things because he felt there was too much, and he just refused to spend the money on the programs, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court ruled that, no, this is passed.
You have to execute it.
You have to
are the
execute this.
executive.
Yes, you can't just sit on this funding. And I wonder if that almost has, like, there's a reverse reality with that, with student loans, in the sense that
So yeah, you could argue that the executive branch is tasked with completing these loans on behalf of Congress. It's not the executive branch's place because Congress has the power of the purse.
But then
I don't think that's not a crazy constitutional argument, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and then also you have to keep in mind, like, things like income-based repayment. To give a little history, under Obama, income-based repayment existed. I think it was an act of Congress. I'm 90% sure that was an act of Congress that said, we're locking it in at 15%. You're never paying more than 15% of your discretionary income. Obama then, by executive order, put in the pay-as-you-earn plan, which dropped it to 10%. So he did. That was an executive order under Obama to reduce the amount of money that was actually required by monthly payments. So in that regard, maybe that's there. So it's like, you have to say, it's like, if we're going to drop it down to zero, is that really any different if he's doing it by executive order?
Yeah. Yeah. So like this, I kind of dub these two strategies, the Bidenist strategy and the Warrenist strategy, because they're definitely on the two. But I want to make it clear that while I prefer Warren's more robust approach here, there are real open questions about the ability. Like, it would have been hard to execute it if the court was 5-4 and Roberts was the deciding vote. I think Roberts would probably find a way to make it happen. The issue with the post RBG Amy Coney Barrett Supreme Court is that Roberts can't be that guy to, do what he did for the Affordable Care Act now. They've taken that power away from him. And that could be a real problem for executive authority going forward here. That's interesting. So let me see here. All right, I'm gonna pop up the plan here. So you've got Biden, who has talked about advancing this bill through Congress. One of the obstructions with advancing it through Congress, the pro, as we just discussed, is it's going to be much, much harder to challenge at a Supreme Court level. The argument, constitutionally speaking, is fairly strong. And you could see guys like Gorsuch would absorb this very clearly. That Congress has the ability to write whatever law they want. If they want to forgive the debt, if they want to, pass a bill that says we're not collecting on this debt anymore, that's Congress made that law that gave those loans out in the first place. Congress has the ability to dismantle those loans. That is a big feather in the cap of the Biden strategy. The problem with the Congress strategy is, of course, Congress, and all of the many problems in Congress. Getting it passed, how are you going to, just all the various issues, Mitch McConnell obstructing, pressure and lobbying, negative campaigns, delay tactics, the filibuster, passing it through reconciliation, those sorts of issues. Warren would propose a more robust administrative action. I want to flesh that out a little bit more, but we also now kind of understand what the big drawback is to this, which is you can do more, at least at first blush, through executive action, but it might be more transient, either by being rolled back by a future executive, like another Trump coming in and going, I just want to erase everything that Elizabeth Warren did, or the Supreme Court saying that what President Biden following the Warren plan did was unconstitutional. But Warren proposed Higher Education Act, or said that the Higher Education Act gives the Department of Education the ability to modify, compromise, waive, or release student loans. So she's under the belief that there is some flexibility here. There is another side of this argument. The authority provides a safety valve for the federal student loan program, letting the Department of Education use its discretion to wipe away loans even when they do not meet the eligibility criteria for more specific cancellation programs like the permanent disability discharge. She then goes, in my administration, we will begin canceling loans under and compromise and modify authorities on day one according to the criteria set out to her plan and amend any regulations or policy positions necessary to get there. So essentially arguing here, a lot of flexibility. She says that she can ensure loan cancellations and make sure that they won't result in any tax liability for borrowers. One thing I'm seeing talked about now is what we mentioned before, that if you forgive all these loans, then it shows up as a tax liability.
Yeah, that's what she's referring to there.
Yeah, it's exactly what she's referring to there. Like, there's a way to protect for that. In addition, Higher Education Act provides that a number of student loan cancellation programs that are not being used fully to give borrowers the relief that they promised under law, including discharges for borrowers whose colleges were closed. So, like, for example, this semester, there are a lot of people who got loans for school and then did not get the in-school product. They didn't get the status product they paid for, Doug. Who the hell wants to pay for Zoom Harvard classes? I am going there to sit next to future senators to one day be able to hit them up for $50.
Yeah, and I think this also includes this is also referring to people who perhaps went to Trump University and had a school that just completely went out of business. Those are situations where a lot of these loans are forgiven.
Yeah. There are hundreds of thousands of borrowers who are waiting to get the cancellations already promised under those laws. And so another thing that the executive branch can do that she illustrates here is that Biden has the ability to, waive off it sounds like hundreds of thousands of borrowers under those things alone. Again, through kind of that impoundment thing, that impoundment argument of I'm required to do this. I got to do this. Them's the laws.
Yeah, and then here's the other issue though. A lot of these change, like if anything was going to be rolled back, like say the Supreme Court said, no, we're going to get rid of some of the stuff for whatever reason. The other issue that is being brought up is that when you take out these loans, you sign your promissory note, and a lot of these things are written in the promissory note by the Department of Education. So it's at that point, it's like a legal contract. So so a lot of these big changes, they're going to have to be retroactive. And then they can't be retroactive. So if they, like, for example, that was the big issue during our good friend Betsy DeVos during her time as education secretary. Her and Trump really wanted to get rid of the public service loan forgiveness program. That was a big push for a while, and ultimately they stopped trying to do it. And one of the big arguments was you just can't do it because it's already written into the promissory notes and it's basically a contract. So screw you, too bad. So I think and that, once again, this is outside of my field of expertise because now we're talking about law and legal issues tied with contracts. I don't know about that, but regardless, I think Warren is ultimately right. I think that there really is what I was talking about earlier. The Department of Education has become an incredibly powerful position, and in charge of an incredible amount of debt that they can decide what to do with to help the economy, which is kind of wild, as I said. Like, depending, when you think about what the education department was for the longest time, where it was. Did you ever see the Battlestar Galactica TV show?
Yeah, I actually just finished rewatching Battlestar Galactica like maybe 2 weeks ago.
Okay, that was the big joke. It's been
yeah. No,
it's like
she was the Secretary of Education, and like she becomes the president. And she becomes a hard ass too.
Yes, but it's like the initial idea was like she's not going to be. She's the Secretary of Education. What is she going to do?
Everyone thinks they can steamroller.
Yes, and now this is becoming like one of the most important cabinet posts.
So, and that's why I think it will be interesting to see how this gets fought at the court level. So I will say that I think that kind of the Warrenist executive branch approach has a lot of stuff working in its favor, including Bush era jurisprudence around the unitary executive. Thanks, Bill Barr. Like by expanding all that shit out, I think a lot of that can be turned into a cudgel against the Republican Supreme Court. Just beat them up with their own jurisprudence.
Yeah, they have so much. The executive branch has so much power now.
I will say also, I think it's actually a problem. Like I would like a different discussion altogether is reigning in the executive branch to have less say so on some of this stuff, because I do think it's bad. But dealing with the world as it is, I do think that people who are proponents of an executive branch based strategy on this have at least a fairly strong argument to go and argue and try to persuade Gorsuch and Roberts to break away from the four crazies in their caucus. Yeah.
I think so. And as I said, a lot of this stems from just how people view student loans and just what they think, it's just how the public itself is going to view a lot of these actions. When it's done by executive order, it's a lot more low key. And as you said, they could do a lot more interesting things. I could do an entire episode on Dave Ramsey, to be completely honest.
I want to be clear. He's come up several times in this episode. I have no strong opinion on him. I see his billboards driving around town sometimes, and other than that, I don't know that I've ever listened to a freaking episode of him.
Oh, I think you, if you look into him a little bit, I think he's a guy that has some decent ideas. I think his heart's in the right spot in a lot of ways, but I also think he's got some skeletons.
I'm always dubious about money guys, right? I don't trust it. Like, you get the money momentum, man. Like, I'm gonna teach you how to get capital momentum.
Yeah.
I don't like any of those cash flow geniuses.
If you're buried in credit card debt, I would encourage you to listen to him. Beyond that, like once he starts talking about like investments and like the people who he brings on, and just I don't know that there's a lot of ethic. It's very it seems very very shady to me, and there's a lot of reasons to believe that. So, but
Yeah, no, no, I would generally say, guys, don't get your investment advice from talk radio.
yes,
Yeah, yeah, don't. I mean, there's a reason. I follow stocks, but there's a reason why I don't do that. I think all that shit's really seedy.
yeah.
No, that's just kind of it's gross to be giving that info out. But like, also, I guess if you are ever really interested, DM me and we can talk in a casual, human way about that shit.
Yes.
Real quickly here's what could happen. According to studentloanhero.com, which it's like crazy that like Student Loan Hero
You know what? That site
isn't free.
isn't that awful.
No, I believe it's not. I
Yeah.
just, what a statement about our society that like we need a thing called Student Loan Hero, and like
Mhm.
it's like a resource, and like it's like, uh, I need a friggin' hero to help me out with these
Yeah,
student
yeah,
loans.
but I'd be happy to let's run through these. I'd like to talk about each one a little bit.
Yeah, let's do it. So we already talked about the proposed $10,000 in federal student loan forgiveness. Let's talk about the extension of moratorium for federal student loans. Oh, we already did that. We
We
did that.
did, and I'll just say it again. I think that's probably one of the best things that he could have done. I think that
It's almost
it's
bigger than the ten thousand
I,
dollars in a
it
way.
is, and I honestly, it was better than I thought because I wasn't exactly sure how far he was going to extend it. I mean, I figured he was going to because I thought maybe we'd go to April, maybe to June. He extended this thing out to October. I mean, that's huge, and I'll give him props for that.
And that might get extended all the way through the end of the year.
It honestly probably should.
Yeah, it probably should. And I'm guessing, based on however society kind of snaps back from the coronavirus, he will extend that stuff. I mean, it's been kind of one thing my brain has been trying to adjust to is like, oh yeah, the government can do competent and capable shit, and like Biden's first 24 hours here, his administration actually snapping in and dropping these day one policies in place. It's like, oh yeah, you could do that. Trump could have done this. Trump could have done this. These are also things Trump could have done and probably gotten reelected. So like a thing that he ought to be thinking about and kick himself over a little bit here.
Mhm.
Full forgiveness of certain public college graduates.
Um, I believe this is referring to maybe like certain like if they're going into high need fields and
Oh,
things
okay,
like
sure,
that.
sure.
Um, yeah, I think that listen, if isn't that should be a large part of this is like, hey, we're giving you these student loans because we want to serve the public good in some way. If you're going to be a math teacher in an inner city low income school, and you're gonna you know and you're going to do something specific related to that. If you're going into some other area where we really need a lot of people for national reasons, or for I have no issue with doing that. I have no problem. I think we need to start having this discussion that education is a very important tool to strengthen our society, and I think that it's absolutely fine to start using the education department to educate people in ways that are going to help the country.
COVID training, right? Like yes,
Yeah.
no one. I didn't go. I didn't. I'm 34 years old. In the 1990s, I wasn't. In 2004, I was graduating high school. I was like, what do you do with your life? Well, I'm gonna be responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. But like, here is an opportunity where society has a need. And it gets to your point. I think this is an interesting philosophical discussion. What is the point of education? I think it's more than just getting people to sit down and read Marcus Aurelius or go to the astronomy lab. Don't get me wrong; those are dope things to do. I like Marcus Aurelius a lot. But the point of education's got to be giving people skills that they need to live their lives. Everything from how to, change a light bulb at your house, how to pay your bills and your taxes, to having something that you could do for a job. And I'm with you. I have
Yeah.
absolutely no problem with using the education system as a jobs program, essentially.
Yes.
And thinking about it like that in a lot of ways.
I also like Marcus Aurelius. His son was kind of a fuck up though, but yeah.
No, but Marcus had it going on, dude.
Sure. All right, next
So
one.
let's go. We haven't talked about this. Like free community college for all students is being discussed.
Yeah. I listen. I don't think that this is. I think this is honestly a really good thing because I do think there's a lot of people who don't know what the hell they want to do when they graduate high school, and it probably is a little bit uh, overwhelming, especially for people who maybe don't have any family or went to college in the first place. And uh,
It can be good though to bop out those 2 years of like preliminary college while
yeah,
you're
get the
still
gen
in,
eds done.
while you're still like in that I done high school when I know what going to school is like mentality. And then if you want to take a couple years off and then go and bop out the bachelor's, like
Yeah,
yeah,
and let's be honest, community college generally don't doesn't cost that much. I mean, at least near me in the Chicago area, it's pretty affordable. I mean, you could cash flow that. I mean, most people do, and that would have. It's just imagine this: most people who have these loans are just from a 4-year degree. Imagine if you could just cut the time you were paying loans in half because you're
in
only paying it 2
half.
years. That would be an incredible thing to kind of cut down on this debt. So yeah, I'm not going to have an issue with that at all. And then one other one I just want to talk about it real quick. We jumped over it was because we talked about the other ones like possibly lower income driven repayments, but annual payouts for public service loan forgiveness applicants. Just what that is, we talked about how they get the forgiveness after 10 years. One thing Biden has talked about doing is possibly like, hey, well, like you get 20% when you do 20% of your time, then you get another 20% when you do another 20%. So they tried to stagger out the payouts or the cancellations. I'm indifferent on that. I don't think that really makes a big difference either way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a strong opinion on it. I assume if someone's an advocate of it, it's probably I'm gonna go ahead and assume it's coming from a good place.
Yeah.
Either a fiscally sound place or like what I doesn't seem to adversely affect anyone.
Yeah.
Then like you have expanded Pell Grants. What are Pell Grants?
Pell Grants are if you depending on your income level, instead of
That's right.
student loans, you might actually get just straight up grants. It's like, hey, here's like a certain amount of money that you just, it's usually nothing huge, like, but it depending on your income level, and your Pell Grants right now could pay for your entire community college.
Yeah. I want to say Pell Grants like it can be a couple grand, 3 grand, which again, not huge, but can pay for community college.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, no, that's great. These are also what I like about these programs too is you're attacking the problem from so many different sides that like again, if an approach like this is attacked via a court strategy, which is going to be very likely here in the coming years, it's the whole reason why they stacked the Supreme Court and the judiciary the way they did. It's the whole reason why Mitch McConnell focused on this. If you approach problem solving though in this manner, where you're slicing out all these different ways, it makes it much harder to Supreme Court to death some of these programs.
Absolutely.
And then increased investment in historically black colleges and universities, other schools, and also workforce training.
Yeah, once again, this kind of stems to this idea of demystifying the Ivy League. And when I say the Ivy League, I don't mean just the Ivy League. I mean just in general, these expensive ass private schools that people have these perceptions of being you have to go to.
Yeah, better
Um,
at education instead of, as we've been discussing here, a status instrument.
yeah, the Honda Civic is fine. You don't need to buy the BMW. I mean,
Yeah, you don't need to. My Fiat 500 is great. I don't need
yes.
like the sports car. A lot of cases you can't. I guess there's a metaphor here too. A lot of cases you can't even drive as fast as you want. So, you know, all right. So the one thing I will say in putting this together, I have a newfound approach for Warren's wealth tax as a financial instrument and as a mechanism for egalitarianism that I didn't really appreciate. Like, I think not unlike what we were talking about with student loans, it's so easy to think about this as just like free college, right? And like that wealth tax is like, tax the 1%, occupy Wall Street. And what it does, yes, it scratches that like id thing, but it's much deeper than that in the sense that like some of these programs you want to do the forgive all the way up thing because that's also part of egalitarianism, but it can't really be fair unless you countervail that with, okay, yeah, we're going to forgive more, but you're also now going to have to pay more in taxes because we're forgiving more.
Yeah.
And the wealth tax actually does a lot of really good stuff. And um, the big difference from what I could tell, I don't know how much you looked into this, like from what I could tell between Warren and Sanders' plan, is Sanders wanted to do the Wall Street side of this, tax Wall Street more. It's not like Warren didn't want to tax Wall Street, but like his way of paying for all this was going to be Wall Street based, and I'm not anti that. I just want to also illustrate that I now appreciate how the wealth tax is different from taxing Wall Street. It's not like an either or thing; it's more an and or thing. The wealth tax allows you to actually get at capital that's getting trapped in a different place, which is in Scrooge McDuck's safe. The only way you can ever get to that money is by taxing it.
And here's why I actually really liked Warren's plan is because, most people who who have a decent amount of wealth saved up and are investing it, and this could be, anyone, it could be retirees who've been investing in their IRAs their entire life.
Yeah.
Once you get that point where you're kind of living off that money, or you're just living off the interest,
you're doing the dividends. Yeah,
you're usually aiming for like 4%. Okay, that's always been kind of like the magic number. Is like in retirement you want to get like a return of 4%. And then Warren was I believe her wealth tax was after a certain point, it was just going to tax like 3%. So I thought that was a very smart and strategic number.
Retirees are never going to hit that threshold. And that to me is actually kind of the big difference between Sanders and Warren is that because that's the other thing. Retirees are still going to have their dividends investments. You know what I mean? Like they're gonna have their portfolio that's set up with blue chipper stocks that offer really good dividends, and get their money off of that, as an augment to Social Security. If they have even the IRAers, as you sort of mentioned, like even them who have like the kind of that closer to 3%, 4%, the magic number, which is, you say that to me, I hear that and go, that's really low.
It's not low for earning. I mean, it's low for earning. Like right now, if you're like investing and you're young and you're saving for retirement, yeah, you don't want to earn 4%.
No, I mean even dividend yields, like I'm hearing that going like, dude, you could be in oil right now and be getting like 7%. Like, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you make twice the amount of money? Point being though, the Warren plan and the wealth tax, whether that investor gets really savvy and gets into oil and the high dividend yield stuff that has growth potential and all that, even if they try to kick ass in the market on their Robinhood, they're not going to get whomped with the wealth tax. The wealth tax is, as I said, getting at Scrooge McDuck, swimming in a safe full of money and gold. And also the other part of the wealth tax is that money's not in play otherwise. That safe money, like in an actual metal safe, if it's not going into Wall Street and getting invested, you have no way of actually taxing it other than just taxing its existence. And that's where the wealth tax is, I think, better. It is. I think it's a better instrument than taxing Wall Street. I'm not anti-taxing Wall Street. I think cap gains and all that stuff needs to go up. It's just kind of a finish on the thought here. But I now really see the deeper wisdom in the wealth tax thing in going through this episode.
Yeah, Warren thought this out. I mean, it's like you just sit there and I remember at the time, I was a Warren person. I was a Warren person. I also liked Yang, and the reason I like them, and I know a lot of people who probably listen to the show probably aren't going to like this, but I generally don't hate capitalism. And I mean, I understand that it's flawed and it has a lot of stuff that sucks about it.
They all tolerate me, man. I feel like that's a fairly safe opinion on this show. Anyone who's going to reject me would have already rejected me for that thought.
That's fair. So it's just like that idea that, like, you know what? I like Yang and Warren stuff because it's not necessarily moving towards more like central planning in the sense that it's still like very market based, but it's a lot more redistribution and allowing the system to work, but using the government to regulate that that market-based approach. And I think, which isn't a new thing. I mean, this is basically the New Deal and that
Yeah.
FDR's stuff. But it's like that. I think that speaks to me a lot more than a lot of the other stuff, and especially when we talk about, oh, just cancel everything, and because then especially when I see now just cancel all student debt, that's the only thing I ever hear people say, and it's like you are not addressing any of the other stuff we just talked about in the last hour and a half.
That to me is the big issue with some of these slogans and stuff. It is that some of these problems are deep and have really, really deep, like multi-layered things, and how that you just need to consider all of them. It's not. This is clearly not an argument for let's not take a robust action. Like all of these plans are literally going to cost trillions of dollars, and I'm entirely in favor of that. And I think this is a big problem that requires a big scale approach. But you have to actually understand what you're trying to solve first, and then have a response that actually addresses all of the layers on that. And yeah, like I will say on Yang, it he's kind of like he says like some things that I like, and then he says some things that like I think sound kind of crazy. And I will say Warren does not do that.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's fair. That's fair.
but yeah, this mayoral run thing has been weird. All right. Anything else that we needed to get in here before we finish out the show?
I think we touched on everything.
Cool, man. All right, that's gonna do it then. Do you have any thoughts or predictions about the Biden presidency here that you want to get on the air and documented?
I will make my prediction right now that he is going to do a lot of stuff through executive order. I don't think that, and I don't think he's necessarily going to push through a lot, but I'll predict this right now. I think the filibuster is going to go, even though he doesn't say it. I think it's going to go.
Dick Durbin today. We're taping on Sunday, January 24th. But
Senator.
Yeah, Durbin coming out on Meet the Press, I think it was, and saying that the filibuster might have to go leads me to believe that at least a partial filibuster kill, and probably will ultimately be the death. What is going to be the exposure to cyanide that kills the filibuster ultimately, I think is coming.
I could see an approach where they maybe like get rid of the filibuster on a case by case basis, and this upcoming $1.9 trillion bill is going to be one of those cases where it's like, well, we'll keep the filibuster, but this time we're not going to have the filibuster. I could see them like doing some bypass like that.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think that puppy is toast. I've definitely come around to that. And to piggyback on what you just said, I think that because Biden is going to do stuff through executive action, that's why you should anticipate at some point this getting litigated at a court level. We should. Hopefully Biden's team is, and that like what they're trying to do here. My hope is that what they try to do early on is lay a trap for the litigants on a case that's kind of shitty for them to take up, that they don't want to take up. But like a Ken Paxton or some other crackerjack AG does try to litigate it all the way up to the Supreme Court. I mean, the other thing is like you are going to have these hot dog AGs, and some of them signed on to the Trump Looney Tunes like court cases. So like you could get them to submarine their own chances to take down Biden by getting them to sign on to a weak case.
Yeah. It's going to be, like I said, it'll be interesting where they go with this. I do not think we're going to see 50 grand forgiven.
No, but I could see it get bumped up to 30 or 40 grand.
Perhaps.
Yeah, I don't think it stays at 10. I'll say that.
Of the things that haven't happened yet from that list that could happen, I think the most likely is actually going to be the income-based repayment percentage being lowered. I think that might be the most likely, like maybe lowered down to 5%.
Yeah, I mean, I could also, I think the expanded Pell Grants and investments in HBCUs and stuff is coming.
Yeah, that stuff too.
Yeah. But other than that, no, I think you're basically right. Cool, man. Doug, where can people find you on the internet?
I'm mostly on Twitter. You can follow me at Skeach101, SKEACH101. I just basically tweet about politics and occasionally other random things in pop culture. So
Yeah.
you can check
Wrestling
me
a
out.
little bit sometimes.
Yeah, a little bit sometimes. Yeah,
Yeah,
you'll see
yeah.
me out in there.
Yeah. And don't worry about the government. At DWATG is where you can find us. Patreon.com/DWATG. We are on PayPal and on Cash App. Cash tag is Chris Nove. PayPal.me/DWATG if you want to support the show that way. Buck a Show is all we ask to become a recurring, subscribing, supporting member of Don't Worry About the Government. That lets you see the video, which has the slate on it and stuff. Which, like, look, I'm trying to make the audio experience still a perfectly good audio experience. It's always been axiomatic in having the Patreon side of things is not reducing the free side, but if you support the show here, you're getting like the video feed with me and Doug. We're fantastic looking individuals. But moreover, a lot like the slate I think is helpful. Like, when I put a graph up, I think it's helpful to actually see a graph versus hear me describe what a graph is. Though I think I'm an eloquent describer of all things related to Trapitalism. Anyways, think about subbing up here and supporting the show. If you've enjoyed 500 of these, if you've been listening long enough to remember when I was still doing John Kasich voices, maybe consider signing up for a Buck a Show over at patreon.com/DWATG. Want to thank you all so much for listening, and until the next one, bye-bye.